Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm not sure where you're all accessing this video from today, so I'm just sending my greetings to you all wherever you are, whatever time zone. My name is Muluka Anmiti Drummond. I'm the UN independent expert on the enjoyment of rights by persons with albinism. First of all, let me start by apologizing for not being present in person today. I would have liked to do this live so that I was available to respond to any questions, any concerns you had, but unfortunately my schedule doesn't allow me to do so today. But I hope that I can somehow contribute to this interesting discussion through this video. Now, if you permit me to, I will start by sharing my screen because I do believe that it's quite useful to have something audio-visual to look at as well, you know, when presentations are being made. So I hope you can see my screen. I'm assuming you can, because I can. Great. So I will be talking about state policy to end witch hunts from an international perspective, and that's the topic of today's discussion. And I just wanted to contribute the international position on this and what work has been done at the UN level in relation to witch hunts, or what we call harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks. So as I've stated, my name is Muluka Anmiti Drummond. I was appointed the UN independent expert on the enjoyment of rights by persons with albinism in August last year. The short title, the short name for my title is UN independent expert on albinism. This is a relatively new position. It was set up in August 2015, and the first ever UN independent expert on albinism was my predecessor, Ms. Iki Ponswa, often referred to as Ike. And she was in office for 6 years and left at the end of July last year when I took over, and I'm happy to be continuing her work. So I've mentioned the term albinism quite a bit, and I'm sure some of you are wondering what is albinism. And another question you may have is, what in the world has this got to do with our topic for today? So I'll start with answering the first question. What is albinism? It is a rare, non-contagious, genetically inherited condition which occurs worldwide regardless of ethnicity or gender. Now, a lot of people would refer to persons with albinism as albinos. We try and discourage this use of the term because it puts the condition before the person, and the preferred term is person with albinism, which places the person before the condition. And often what is used to explain this is that if you know someone with cancer, you're not referring to them as a canceroid. It's just a person who has cancer, or, you know, Bob who has cancer, for example. Albinism is not contagious. The persons with albinism all over the world, of different races, of different ethnicities, nationalities. So albinism can occur the world over, even though many people may think that it only occurs in Africa. And of course, Africa is the place where it's more visible because albinism leads to, it is due to a lack of pigmentation, or lack of melanin in the skin, hair and eyes in some cases as well. And this leads to a marked difference between the complexion or the coloring of persons with albinism and the coloring of other people of the same ethnicity or the same race. And therefore, in African darker populations, the difference is more visible. So how does albinism relate to witchcraft and ritual attacks? Well, there are a number of wrong beliefs that people hold in relation to persons with albinism and albinism in general. Some believe that the body parts of persons with albinism can give luck or fortune, wealth, or, you know, to the possessor, to whoever possesses the body part. Some wrongly believe that having a child with albinism is a bad omen, or having a person with albinism in a community is bad luck, and that person will bring bad luck. There are also beliefs such that having sex with a woman who has albinism, or a mother of a child with albinism, can cure AIDS. These wrong beliefs lead to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks. And the accusations of witchcraft can be manifested through, or can lead to, children with albinism and their mothers being abandoned by their family. It can lead to insults, ill treatment, stigma, and discrimination against persons with albinism. There can be exclusion or banishment from the community. They can be excluded or banished from the community because they're believed to be witches, because they're, you know, accused of being witches, and so their treatment is very negative. Also, because their body parts are seen as providing some kind of luck, their practices that are carried out so that the body parts can be used. So persons with albinism may be abducted, they may be trafficked, they have body parts cut off. They may even be killed so that people can access their body parts. And then women with albinism, or mothers of children with albinism, as mentioned, may be raped in certain cases. And these are ritual attacks aimed at getting some kind of benefit. And therefore, this is why albinism is often referred to in the context of accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks, harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and harmful attacks. So what has the UN response been to such accusations of witchcraft? I'll mention what has been done by my mandate, the UN independent expert on albinism. And there have been other things done, but I'll highlight what's been done by my mandate. So first of all, in 2017, September 2017, there was an expert workshop on witchcraft and human rights, which was held in Geneva. And this workshop sought to show how witchcraft leads to or impacts on human rights, and leads to human rights violations or impacts on human rights. The same year, my mandate produced the report on witchcraft and the human rights of persons with albinism, which specifically showed how these accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks impacts on the rights of persons with albinism. Last year, just before the end of my predecessor's mandate, the UN adopted Resolution 478, and this resolution aims to eliminate harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks. I'd also like to highlight a recent thematic report which came out or was published this year in March on harmful practices and hate crimes targeting persons with albinism. So we talked about the report being about, the resolution being about the elimination of harmful practices. So the question might come to mind as to what are harmful practices. So these are persistent practices and behaviors which are based in discrimination on the basis of sex, gender, age, and other grounds. They often involve violence and cause physical and psychological harm or suffering. So by persistent practices and behaviors, we're talking about behaviors that have maybe even become customs, become tradition. It's what people have been doing for generations, for a long period of time. And these are practices that are based on discrimination. So usually when we talk about accusations of witchcraft, they tend to be against older people, women, children, especially children who are seen as difficult, persons with disabilities, including mental disabilities. So because of the differences of these people, then these practices exist, and these practices involve some form of violence or some kind of physical, psychological harm or suffering, and sometimes even both. And so these are what we're referring to as harmful practices. Now, Resolution 478 recognizes that these accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks will constitute harmful practices. It also does not only refer to persons with albinism, but recognizes that it is often women, children, persons with disability, and older persons who are victims of such accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks. And therefore, it's not just a resolution for persons with albinism, it's a resolution for any vulnerable group that might be accused of being witches or might be subjected to ritual attacks. Most importantly, the resolution also recognizes the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And so it doesn't seek to undermine these religious thoughts, conscience, but seeks to undermine any practice or any exercise of this right which results in harmful practices, and which I've just mentioned before. It also recognizes that there are traditional, complementary, or other forms of medicine, which is recognized by the World Health Organization as well. So it doesn't seek to undermine use of herbal remedies or any other remedies, as long as those traditional medicines or complementary medicines do not lead to harmful practices against vulnerable groups. And the resolution specifically calls on states to condemn and take measures to eliminate harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks that result in human rights violation. It calls on states to ensure accountability and effective protection of all persons from such practices, and also for regional and international initiatives, cooperation to protect vulnerable groups of people, highlighting that these regional and international initiatives have to be relevant to the local context. Finally, the resolution also calls on the UN to organize an expert consultation with states and other stakeholders. And then the consultation should help the UN in preparing a study on harmful practices specifically related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks, and to also inform further action by mechanisms by the UN and other human rights bodies. And this report is supposed to be submitted to the Human Rights Council's 52nd session. The March session was the 49th session, so we're talking about the 52nd session here. So harmful practices may also amount to hate crimes, and this was the subject of the most recent report, which talks about harmful practices and hate crimes against persons with albinism, but they may also constitute hate crimes against other groups of people. But what are these harmful practices? Sorry, hate crimes. What do we mean by hate crimes? So hate crimes are crimes that are committed with a biased motive. That means that the person who's committing the crime has a bias against the characteristic or identity of the victim. And this might be the person's age, the person's coloring, the person's disability, and you just assume, well, if a person has epilepsy, for example, then they are witch, and if they are witch, then we can commit a crime against them, and therefore in this case it may constitute a hate crime. Now, I've said a lot about the context and what has happened, and I don't really want to speak too much and take up too much time, but I do want to have to just give a few conclusions and some few thoughts from my side on what can be considered when producing or developing a policy to end witch hunts at the national level. First of all, it's important to carry out a study to understand the root causes of the accusations of witchcraft. It's important to understand who the usual victims are and what's the basis of discrimination applicable. So by this, I've mentioned the fact that it tends to be against older people, especially older women, against persons with disabilities. And it's just understanding within the local context, who are the people who are usually victims? Why is there this form of discrimination in terms of the local context, and just broadly understanding the root causes of these accusations of witchcraft in the country. Then, measures that are then carried out must be carried out on the basis of such such information, so that they can be tailored to resolving the root causes and tackling the whole issue as a whole. The state should take into account the existing obligations under various human rights instruments. There are human rights instruments related to the protection of the child, to elimination of discrimination against women, the elimination of racial discrimination, and all of these would have context on harmful practices and what must be done in relation to harmful practices such as accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks. Any policy must seek, as I've just said, to tackle the root causes, and this should include public awareness to dispel any myths and misconceptions around the target group and around those who are often accused of witchcraft. This may also be tackling issues about increasing the scientific knowledge of issues. So sometimes people are accused of causing hurricanes or causing natural disasters. And therefore it's important to increase as well understanding of the scientific causes of these issues, so that persons and other persons are not accused, vulnerable groups are not accused of being the witches that have created these natural disasters. Of course, there's also a need to ensure that the appropriate and adequate investigations, prosecutions, and sentences against those who are carrying out harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft. So it's not necessarily that people are being penalized or criminally sentenced for accusing a person of being a witch, but they're being penalized for the practices, the consequences. So that accusing a person of being a witch is one thing, but then where you accuse a person of being a witch and then kill them because you think they are a witch, then that needs to be investigated and prosecuted. And of course, there's a need for appropriate laws in order for this to be done. Sometimes there's a gap in the law and people cannot be prosecuted for these things. And these laws should also include the punishing of such harmful practices as hate crimes where appropriate. Sometimes these kind of practices, accusations of witchcraft, or the human rights violations related to accusations of witchcraft and the harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft are not reported. And they may not be reported because witnesses are afraid to report or victims are afraid to report. So it's very important to ensure that there's witness and victim protection included in any state policy. I would also like to just highlight, although it's not very relevant for this region, but it may be something that could be learned from an example of best practice, that the African Union is at the moment, the Pan-African Parliament is at the moment developing guidelines related to harmful practices that are related to accusations of witchcraft and harmful attacks. So it's a very complicated issue because I know many laws do not recognize witchcraft, and therefore accusing a person of being a witch cannot be tackled because witchcraft is not recognized. But what we are calling for at the international level is for the harmful practices that are related to these accusations of witchcraft to be tackled, to be ended, to be prosecuted. I think I'm going to leave it at this, leave my discussion here. I've spoken for a very long time. Again, I thank you for your time, and I'm sorry again that I was not able to be there in person. I will share my contact details with the organizers. Please feel free to contact me should you have any further questions. Thank you and have a good day.